At the end of 1916, some doubts are beginning to emerge. The Somme isn't, after all, the great success that people hoped it was, and when the Russian Revolution breaks out in 1917, many other countries are fearful both of war weariness and of the possibility that that will result in revolution. By 1918, most people on the British and French side reckon the important thing is to wait for the Americans to come.
The United States has had an ambivalent love affair with Europe since its birth. Millions of Americans who are refugees from the miserable treatment they had from their own countries in Europe. Why should they fight Europe's war? The real reason why the United States went into the war was because it was in her fundamental strategic and economic interest to do so.
The entry of the United States to the First World War is one of those decisive points. The most immediate effect is financial. The second is maritime. What brought the United States into the war was Germany's declaration of submarine warfare. And what the United States contributes is large numbers of destroyers to act as escorts for the convoys which will actually enable the defeat of unrestricted U-boat warfare. The third element is the creation of a mass American army.
Substantially above 1 million, close to 2 million men by the end of the war, there to plug the holes in the French and the British lines, and they were huge, those holes. What happens in Germany is the beginning of the worst inflationary spiral probably in history. You simply had to break the law to stay alive.
Internal unrest,
They ran out of petrol.
strikes,
They ran out of food.
sympathies for the Bolsheviks.
There were even reports that when German units broke through British lines, they stopped to eat the British rations.
Desire even for revolution within Germany. August 8th is the Black Day of the German army. The Allied forces are successful with a breakthrough through the German line.
Between 50 and 100,000 men surrendered.
And from then on, it's becoming clear within a few weeks that Germany has to enter negotiations for a truce and then settle the war.
At the beginning of October, it is the German army that initiates the armistice negotiations. But that is only the armistice that affects Germany on the Western Front. Austria-Hungary had already sought their own terms. The Ottoman Empire had already sought terms. And so the war ends at different times in different places.
The peace treaty of Versailles, June 1919, it ended the war, technically, legally, internationally. It brought about a peace settlement, and the peace settlement had more or less everybody uneasy.
The reason is that there were delegates from countries around the world that created vast diplomatic bazaar, where everyone has his goods to sell and they know who they have to persuade to buy them. And it presented an enormous problem.
How are you going to rebuild with new countries, with new political systems?
How do you end wars?
It changed the political map of not only Europe, but also Middle East and other parts of the world as well.
Alsace-Lorraine was given back to France.
Japan was given Shandong, even though Shandong is an intrinsic part of China.
Germany will forfeit territory. They lose territory in the west, they lose territory in the east, and they lose territory in the south.
Countries that did not exist before suddenly appeared.
Everybody at the peace treaty wanted the Soviet Union, Russia, revolutionary Russia, to go away.
Russia wasn't participating. Russia was rejected. There was no single Russia. There were different governments on the territory. Of course, the Allies couldn't invite the Bolsheviks.
The Treaty of Versailles also left the French uneasy. The French wanted more securities against the future Germany being aggressive.
The war had destroyed Europe physically, and politically.
The most devastating long-term result of the Peace Treaty of Versailles was not so much the territorial losses. It was the last paragraph handing the principal guilt in 1914 over to the Germans.
The treaty was a colossal failure because it was so unfair. It was a colossal failure because the reparations that were asked of Germany were so unreasonable.
The result was a complete mess.
Italy won the war in the end, but it emerged psychologically as a loser. And one of the outcomes is this increasingly radical nationalist movement on the right.
Ottomans were not part of the Treaty of Versailles, but what ended up happening is because their side lost the war, the Ottoman Empire itself disappeared.
In a Russian case, war very much influenced the situation of the civil war. People were trained in brutality. Brutality was legitimized as a political tool.
The Indians, when they came back, were more confident, politicized, much more aware of their rights. So in a way, it's ironic because the imperial war was also the starting point for the end of the empire, the beginning of decolonization, and that's the paradox, that an imperial war ultimately ends up in enabling or facilitating the loss of empire